Hello, I'm Joe, and today we're talking about Grindhouse, the box office bomb that absolutely banged. The film, a collaboration between directors Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino, was a throwback to the 70s exploitation movies that they grew up loving. It was a double feature that consisted of Rodriguez's Planet Terror and Tarantino's Death Proof. Costing around $53 million to produce, the movie only made $25 million during its entire run in theaters. So why did this collaboration between two directors at the height of their popularity fail? And why is it high-key one of the most notable bangers in either of their filmography? From the moment 14-year-old me saw Grindhouse, I was absolutely in love. I walked out thinking it was one of the coolest movies I had ever experienced. I was so excited to go to school that Monday and talk to all the other kids about it. There was only one problem. No one watched it. Do you know how disappointing it was to have seen a woman with a machine gun leg and have nobody to geek out about it with? Do you know how maddening it was to make Thanksgiving jokes only for everyone to respond with, "What are you talking about?" For 3 hours I stood in the light only to have to be cast back into the darkness of man's ignorance, and god damn it, I say no more! Sorry, I just really like Grindhouse. But before I go into why this movie is a banger you've been sleeping on, first, a little context. In the 90s, Tarantino and Rodriguez became fast friends as they traveled to multiple film festivals and rose through the indie ranks. With Rodriguez's El Mariachi and Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs, it was clear they both shared a love for similar kinds of movies, particularly the 70s exploitation films they both grew up with. Their first collaboration was the 1996 action horror Banger from Dusk Till Dawn, which we're gonna talk about sometime. Rodriguez directed the film and Tarantino wrote and starred in it. Outside of Tarantino directing a scene in Sin City and Rodriguez doing some of the music for Kill Bill Volume 2, the two didn't really professionally collaborate too much beyond that, which makes sense considering both men write and direct their own movies, with Rodriguez in particular basically being a one-man film crew who writes, shoots, directs, edits, does like every damn thing on his movies. If you haven't read Rebel Without a Crew, highly recommend it, especially if you're trying to get into filmmaking. This lack of collaboration would eventually change in 2007 though. As I said before, both men had an immense love for 70s exploitation films. See, back in the old days, double features were pretty par for the course, and one of the ways that studios would make it happen is that they wouldn't sell their movies to exhibitors unless they also agreed to play their schlocky B movies. In addition to that, there were also theaters called Grindhouses, which were essentially dollar theaters that specialized in playing exploitation films. These were often popular among the youth because the tickets were cheap and you can get 3 hours of sex, violence, and stilted dialogue. It was essentially Tubi, but for the 70s. Grindhouse, the movie, was intended to replicate that experience, with Rodriguez's Planet Terror being an action horror comedy and Death Proof being a slasher on wheels. But the directors didn't just leave it to putting two movies together. Oh no. Grindhouse was a complete, cohesive experience filled with fake trailers and ads for fake companies. Both movies are great on their individual merits, but it was that presentation that really vaulted Grindhouse into something special. So why did it bomb? Well, as Tarantino puts it, Grindhouse was a little too cool for school. When I saw it, I had no idea what a grindhouse was. I mean, I knew about blaxploitation movies as a result of watching films like Shaft and Superfly with my grandfather, but the larger world of 70s exploitation was pretty foreign to me. I really just went to go see the movie because it was from the guys that made Desperado and Kill Bill Volume 1, which were like the coolest things I'd ever seen as a 14-year-old. I mean, arguably they're still the coolest things I've ever seen at the big age of 31. I didn't know much about 70s exploitation, grindhouses, and the theatrical distribution methods of the 70s until I went to film school. Grindhouse didn't flop because it was bad. It flopped because, much like today, general audiences don't have much experience or knowledge of film history beyond whatever's playing at their multiplex this weekend or streaming on whatever service they prefer. Additionally, while counter-programming can be a solid strategy, releasing a grimy, gritty horror movie on Easter weekend is, a choice. And honestly, that choice is even weirder because 2007 was not a particularly strong year in horror. Like, this movie could have killed it if you released it, like, in that summer doldrums window of August or in prime horror season of October, but, you know, hindsight's 2020. Grindhouse was just a little too conceptual for its own good and understandably hard to market. Usually, you're just trying to convey the story of one movie, but in this case, you had two, and you weren't really selling the plot, more so an experience. And considering most audiences didn't have any familiarity with that experience, it was a pretty hard sell. Simply put, Grindhouse bombed because it was an inherently risky prospect that failed to resonate with larger audiences, but it's in no way indicative of the quality of the film itself. Because despite its status as a box office bomb, Grindhouse is an absolute banger, and I'm here to tell you why. I mean, for starters, you get two dope films for the price of one. For Baby Me, this was a full Saturday at the movies, and I was in heaven. This was my first in-theater experience with a double feature, and it's one I'll never forget. It holds a special place for me for that reason alone. The movies really work in conversation with each other. With Planet Terror, you have a non-stop, balls-to-the-wall action horror extravaganza. Rodriguez is a master at shooting action, and it's no different in Planet Terror. The cast knows exactly what type of movie they're in and play their roles pitch perfectly. From Freddy Rodriguez as the mysterious and dangerous Wray, Rose McGowan as Sherry Darling, to Michael Biehn as the perpetually exasperated sheriff, everyone knows what they're in and they're just going for it. The gore is grimy, the action exciting, and most of the jokes land. There's no lulls in the plot here. It's all killer, no filler, and it's the best kind of ride you can ask for, especially during spooky season. As a hormonal piss-brain teenager, Planet Terror is basically everything I was looking for in a movie. Zombies, machine gun legs, gorgeous women, hyper-violent gags. I mean, hell, as a less hormonal, still piss-brained adult, that's basically all I'm still looking for in movies. In fact, I was so enamored with Planet Terror, I was a little perplexed as to why Death Proof was the main event. As a kiddo, I dug the car chase stuff in Death Proof, but I considered everything else to be kind of underwhelming, especially considering the non-stop spectacle it followed. As an adult, I now love Death Proof just as much as Planet Terror and understand its positioning in the double feature. See, Grindhouse is basically built like a good wrestling show. It gets off to an incredibly hot start, cools down a little bit before ramping it up to 100 for the finale. It's basically the movie equivalent of playing GM mode in WWE 2K. So yeah, at the time I thought Death Proof was a little slow and a little boring, but as I got older, something crazy happened. I gained patience and an unusually strong attention span. But most importantly, I've watched a lot of movies since Death Proof. So, as a teenager, I was only really watching whatever blockbuster was in theaters and whatever got replayed on TV. My tastes have massively expanded in the years since Grindhouse. I watch any and everything, which is why you should subscribe to Project Wonder, because your boy knows his shit. But this expanding taste also included watching the types of movies that Tarantino and Rodriguez were trying to emulate in Grindhouse. See, a lot of these Grindhouse movies were made on hella low budgets, so this meant that in your average 90 to hour 45 minute movie, there'd only probably be about like 20 to 30 minutes of badassery. I mean, a notable example is Shaft, which starts with a banger of a theme song, but you're just watching Shaft walk around the city. And a lot of times between the shootouts and occasional nudity, there was just boring, stilted dialogue that you had to get through. And if you know anything about Tarantino, boring, stilting dialogue is not in his repertoire. See, with Death Proof, he simply doesn't pay pastiche to the films of his era, but he actually improves upon them. He works within the same limitations and structure, but he makes the boring parts interesting. Having read the script for Death Proof, I gained a deeper understanding of what makes this movie tick, because on the page, those conversations are riveting, and you spend an unusual amount of time learning about the victims, their hopes, fears, insecurities, desires. They're not simply objects to be slaughtered, they're actual people with actual problems before Stuntman Mike shows up and, does his thing. And speaking of Stuntman Mike, what a Kurt Russell performance, y'all. Russell got his start as a child actor working on the types of shows that Stuntman Mike would work on himself. You know he knows these types of people, and he lays on just the right amount of charm and likability before Stuntman Mike goes full serial killer. And outside of Russell, the whole cast kills it. You believe both groups of friends. Their relationships feel real and lived it and specific. And they have to be because we spend so much time with them before we even get to the vehicular manslaughter. Which, y'all, the vehicular manslaughter. So the first two car sequences show Stuntman Mike fully in his element, and it is terrifying. This is due both to Russell's performance, the design of the car, and the way the action is shot. And the final chase, where Stuntman Mike meets his match, is just one of the all-time car chase sequences. Death Proof is an ode to practical stunt work and a showcase for why CGI is never gonna quite replicate the thrill of a man getting behind the wheel and doing some absolutely dumb shit. And the last reason Grindhouse rings is the presentation. When it comes to cultivating a vibe, Grindhouse is A1. The fake trailers really tie the whole thing together and create a one-of-a-kind experience. All of it's funny, but you can tell it comes from a sincere place of love. I mean, the fact a movie exists that's directed by Quentin Tarantino and Freddy Rodriguez, along with assists from Eli Roth, Edgar Wright, and Rob Zombie, that's just a beautiful thing. As time has gone on, Grindhouse has become somewhat of a cult classic. I mean, hell, of the 5 fake trailers, 3 of them have become actual movies in Machete, Hobo with the Shotgun, and the upcoming Thanksgiving. The lack of financial success led to Miramax releasing Death Proof and Planet Terror separately for both home video and their international releases, which I think is an absolute shame. You can currently stream or rent Death Proof for Planet Terror separately, but if you want the full Grindhouse experience, the only way you can get it is by purchasing one of these bad boys. I think they go for like $8 on Amazon, and I'm telling you, you're gonna get your money's worth. There's no experience quite like this movie right here. So in conclusion, watch Grindhouse.